Hi, hello. I hope you're taking care of yourself. If you're new here, my name is Lexi, and I read 119 books in 2023, which is both a number that feels way too ridiculous for any one girl to reach on her own, and yet also was still somehow 3 books less than my 2023 reading goal. And if you need to ask why that didn't happen in the 11th hour, why I couldn't crank out even like a few comics at the end of the year, it is because a certain recap was breaking my spirit for like the last 3 weeks of 2023. I did what I had to do to survive, okay? But anyways, I still obviously got through a lot of books this year, and other than reading to dissociate from having to think independent thoughts about my life or my future, I also really enjoy reading as much as I do because it gives me this cool opportunity to just shout about the books that I love into the camera and recommend them to you guys. Especially if you might not have the time to melt your brain on books as much as I do, this is my attempts to kind of separate the wheat from the chaff, if you will. And this video is going to be me giving you my best of the entire year. These are my 10 favorite books of 2023. In the next video that you see from me on this channel, I'm going to be talking about my least favorite books of 2023, but I'm posting this first because this video is proof that I like things, okay? 60 seconds of reading stats for anybody who's interested. I track everything that I read in both a bullet journal and also this massive Notion spreadsheet that I spent way too much time building. And I do that so I can make cool graphs for myself and feel like a data scientist, even though I haven't taken a math class since high school. Here's my first graph and chart. And as you can see, I was pretty consistent throughout the year, except for March and April, which is when I was writing my honors thesis for college. And honestly, it's a miracle that any books were read at all during that time. I was in dire straits. In terms of genre, this is my graph for the year. If you're new to my channel, my reading taste is chaos, basically. I did quite a bit of themed series on TikTok, so it ended up being an abnormally heavy romance year, but everything else ended up being pretty normal. Last graph, just for fun. I didn't do this on purpose, it just kind of ended up this way and I thought it was funny, so I want to share. Only a slim 15% of the books that I read this year were written by men. But I'll have you know, there's actually 2 men inside of my top 2023 books list, so they're overrepresented among my favorites. Great work, men, beating the odds like that. Yay! Keep it up next year, I believe in you. Okay, that's it. Those are the stats. Now let's talk about the books that claw their way out of these graphs and into my heart. They're more than just numbers to me, okay? These are my favorites of the entire year. Oh, also there's no spoilers in this list. Obviously, I want you to like actually read these books, so you don't have to worry about that. Okay, jumping in real quick with the word from today's sponsor, which is Wild. Wild is a sustainable natural deodorant company where you buy 1 canister, just like this one, and then you can refill it endlessly forever with any number of their beautiful scents. I've been using Wild at this point for about 3 months or so now, and I've been loving it. I've been an antiperspirant girly for basically my entire life, and it was actually only in doing research for this brand that I thought for longer than 2 seconds for the first time about the potential health consequences to just not letting myself sweat and clogging my pores with aluminum, you know, the metal that's in all of the deodorants that I've been buying for myself for my entire life. And it turns out that maybe biological functions that you evolved to have as a human being have a purpose or something crazy like that. So needless to say, I took the opportunity to swap to Wild, and it's a decision I've actually felt really good about. I love the concept of the refills. Like, there's just so much less product waste this way because you're not throwing away your entire canister every single time that you have to get a new deodorant. And the refills also last way longer than I expected them to. Like, I've been using this one for basically the entire time that I've had this deodorant, and we are on the last dregs, but like, we're still cooking. It's not done yet. I was also really impressed by the staying power that this has. I've only really felt the need to reapply when I've done like a lot of physical activity in a day, which was also the case for my antiperspirant, so it's really no different, and I finally feel good about myself and like the chemicals that I'm exposing my body to on a daily basis. So if you want to join me and try this out, Wild is based in the UK but ships internationally, and you can check it out and get 20% off of the entire website with the code NewlyNova20 through the link in my description. Thank you again to Wild for sponsoring today's video. I really appreciate it. Let's get back to it. Okay, welcome back. Let's get started. These are in ranked order, by the way, from 10 to 1 because I'm not a coward. So coming in at 10th place, we have Circe by Madeline Miller. I'm just wondering if you would like a slice of Greek goddess discovering and honing her magical powers, or maybe a little bit of Greek goddess destroying the disgusting men that are doing evil things on her island. How about Greek goddess finding herself after decades and centuries of being alive and still being capable, even in age, of growing and changing and developing as a person? Just what do you think about like a Greek goddess doing all of those things in a book? Obviously, I was into it. This is a modernized retelling of the story of Circe from the Odyssey, but obviously much more fleshed out in totality with the rest of her lore and with what is happening to her on this island, even when she's out of the picture of the original mythology. And I remember when I was reading this, like I was slightly bored at the beginning. I feel like it took me a little while to buy into the story, but soon enough, like I was Circe. Circe was me. We were the same, and I was feeling every single feeling that she felt throughout the rest of the book. I was just deeply emotionally invested in the journey that she took as a character. And I thought the payoff was fantastic, just answering questions about what it means to care for yourself and for other people, and how to deal with regret and figure out what humanity actually is. Like, there's just so much beauty inside of this book, and the best piece of praise that I can give this is I have no idea what is canon and what Madeline Miller just made the fuck up for this story. Everything that she writes just feels like it must have always been the way that things were. And she has such a gift when it comes to modernizing these incredibly old stories and breathing new life into these characters that we have known for literally thousands of years. Like, she's just so talented. I want to share a couple of quotes that I really love just to give you an idea of how beautifully this is written. I had no right to claim him. I knew it. But in a solitary life, there are rare moments when another soul dips near yours, as stars once a year brush the earth. Such a constellation was he to me. Did you hear her? Such a constellation was he to me? The next one. I felt the currents move. The grains of sand whispered against each other. His wings were lifting. The darkness around us shimmered with clouds of his gilded blood. Beneath my feet were the bones of 1,000 years. I thought, I cannot bear this world a moment longer. Then, child, make another. If I could snap, I would be snapping. Just nobody's doing it quite like her. And apparently the streets are saying that she's writing a Persephone retelling right now. Same time, same place, 2024 best of list. If it's out, yes please. Well-deserved place on this list. Number 9 on this list is Juniper and Thorn by Ava Reid. And when I tell you, I think constantly about how I didn't give this book 5 stars at the beginning of this year. I was a clown. It was clownish. It was carnival behavior, and I apologize for that. This book has aged like the finest cheddar cheese in my memory, okay? Extra sharp. This is a fantasy horror retelling of The Juniper Tree, which is a fairy tale that I had never heard of before I read this, so don't feel dumb or uncultured if the same is true for you. And it's about this girl, Marlin Chen, who lives in this big mansion with her wizard dad and her 2 sisters. And their dad is bigoted and abusive and evil. He like doesn't let them leave or talk to anybody except for the customers who kind of come into the house for little spells and tinctures and stuff. So all around, to put it like super lightly, the 3 of them are having a pretty bad time inside of this house. But one day, Marlin Chen sneaks out with her sisters to go to the nearby city to see a ballet. And this experience changes Marlin Chen's entire life as she meets up with the star dancer of this ballet troupe and just kind of starts to discover what she was missing in the outside world. But I don't mean what she was missing in like a, oh boy, there's a young girl new to the big city trying to discover all the wonders of the universe kind of way. I mean what she was missing in a confronting the terror that has been your entire life and also trying to solve the mystery of this serial killing monster that is just disemboweling people inside of the city. It's really fucked up. It's pretty heavy on the horror. I remember doing a play in like grade 5 about fractured fairy tales. It was over for me after that point. I've loved them ever since. But this is the best one I've read as an adult, and it's not close in my opinion. The whimsical atmosphere of this book, of the writing, it's gorgeous. It feels like reading folklore. But the content is insane. It's crazy, it's gruesome, it's horrifying, and it's so good. This book is very, very, very much not for everybody. Please be aware of what you're getting yourself into with this. At its core, this is a book thematically that's about different ways of coping with trauma, specifically CSA, and it's about these 2 characters in particular who are recovering from these very different traumatic pasts and finding connection and commonality in the space between them, while also just burning everything the fuck down around them, which is a pretty cool premise if you ask me. This book isn't a romance, and I think going into it expecting it to be is dooming yourself to be disappointed, but the romantic elements of these characters finally feeling safe and free together, I really loved. This book is quite slow. It's a character study more than it's a book where things happen. So note it as well if you're thinking about picking this up, but God, the climax of this book with the mirror, if you know, you know, it's wild. My jaw tunneled through the floor and into the core of this earth, never to return. Like, I loved this. I think about this book constantly. This book is not perfect, which I think is why I didn't initially give it 5 stars, but it is a perfect book for me, if that makes sense. And let me just put it out there into the world. Ava Reid, you're not watching this, but like, if you are, I'm obsessed with you, and I think that you're awesome. Okay, moving on. Number 8 book of 2023, we have You Again by Kate Goldbeck. This was my second favorite romance novel in a year where I was just reading so many romance novels, so many more than I have in years past. And I think a lot of them ended up really blurring together for me, but You Again was one of the books that really stuck out. It is a debut, it is a published Reylo fanfiction, yet again. I've never seen a Star Wars movie, not a one. And yet, this is the second Reylo author that just has a chokehold on my spirit. That fandom eats their Wheaties, okay? They've been cranking out some gems, and I'm not too proud to admit it. You Again is a gender-bent loose retelling of When Harry Met Sally that casts the girl Ari as the commitment phobe, kind of free spirit type person, and the guy, Josh, as this prim and proper put together chef who doesn't understand why Ari is the way that she is and yet is still drawn to her anyways. Josh also kind of gives Carmy from The Bear, if you're into that. Just want to put that out there because I was into that. But anyways, the 2 of them meet for the first time when they discover that they've both been hooking up with the same woman, which is pretty messy, as you might imagine. But then they go on to meet like 3 or 4 and more times throughout multiple years in these increasingly antagonistic ways until finally they get to the meeting where they establish a friendship, and the rest of the book is able to take place from there. I had the fortune of reading this book before it came out, and I was both surprised and not surprised at all when it ended up having such mixed reviews. Ari and Josh are objectively kind of bad people. They kind of suck, but they kind of suck in a way that I feel like I kind of suck, you know? It's in this classic rom-com way of sucking. Like, they're both depressed, they both hate themselves, they both have bad coping methods of dealing with those things that are also fundamentally incompatible with the other person. But god damn it, those kids are in love, and I want the best for them. In this whole book, I like couldn't help myself. They're just so fun to root for. The banter in this book is sublime. I actually found it to be pretty funny. And look, I don't know, if you want to read a romance novel between two people that you absolutely love, I think you'll probably hate this, but it's fun, it's messy, it's raw, it's oftentimes pretty infuriating, and it's just exactly my kind of romance novel. Seventh best book for 2023, we have Actor Age Eve Brown by Talia Hibberts. Possibly the only book that's ever started with a playlist that ended up being this much of a banger. And speaking of you again, speaking of exactly my kind of romance novel, this is the other one on my list. It's in 7th place. And this book is all at once so different from You Again, truly so different, but also like at its core, kind of exactly the same. This is like the fluffy warm cup of cardamom tea to You Again's double shot of espresso and whiskey, if you catch my drift. This book is the third in the Brown Sisters trilogy, which are all interconnected standalones, so you can just read this one if you want, but I would recommend the other two, especially the first book. They're both really good. I just didn't like them quite as much as this one. And this book follows Eve Brown, who is a trust fund nepo baby with crippling ADHD, who has, like many of us, about 1,001 different hobbies and interests, but absolutely no direction in life. And her parents, at the beginning of this book, end up cutting her off. They're like, you keep quitting things and being bad, so until you get good and you hold down a real person job, no more trust fund for you. Good luck out there. So Eve ends up applying for this position at a bed and breakfast that's run by this man named Jacob, and she goes on to absolutely flub the interview, and then on the way out of the parking lot, hit this man with her car, which basically roundabout forces him to hire her anyways, because now he has a broken arm and he's like desperate for help. But yeah, I mean, obviously it's a pretty rocky start to their relationship, and the two of them are forced to work together closely on this project despite thinly veiled dislike for each other, which is one of my favorite tropes in romance novels. I love reluctant partners in crime. I eat it up every single time. This book is also Grumpy Sunshine. The banter is off the wall. So much fun between them, just like with You Again. I feel like good, not cringe banter is the most surefire way into my heart when you're writing a romance novel, and this book has it in spades. But what I really love about this is the representation. Jacob is autistic, and Eve finds out during this book that she's also autistic. But this book also doesn't shy away from the ways that they're still pretty different. It's not presenting that singular monolithic picture that we typically get in the media of what an autistic person looks like, because both of them have different personalities. They have different obstacles that they're facing inside of the story, even though they find it really easy to understand the other person. And I very rarely see that in books. So to have that, and then to also just be a really good time, like sincerely such a banger of a book with fire banter and lots of cute scenes. This one for sure has a special place in my heart. It's just really, really good. Number 6 on the list is Bloodmarked by Tracy Deonn. Bloodmarked is the sequel to Legendborn, and the Legendborn series in general follows a girl named Bree who attends this early college program at UNC and then ends up getting swept up into the goings-on of this like massive underground secret society that is based around the mythology of Avalon and the Knights of the Round Table. And all of those knights for generations have been like pseudo reincarnated in their descendants. Like these kids are still their own people, but they're like 25% possessed and also have the superpowers that tie to their corresponding knight. And the idea is that all of these descendants of King Arthur and his knights are locked in this eternal war against demons and against evil. And there's a lot more going on than that underneath the surface, obviously, but I will tell you nothing because I firmly believe that you need to experience this book for yourself, okay? Dude, just trust me. If you don't already know this about me, this is my favorite young adult series, and to any doubters in the audience who are like, why would you read young adult as a 23-year-old woman? What's in it for you? First of all, shut up, okay? Let me cook. Let me do what I need to do to survive. But secondly, to the doubters and to the skeptics, you should try this. This is the creme de la creme of the genre in terms of being both youthful, like it's fast-paced, it has your favorite tropes of your childhood and your teenage years, and it's got that classic young adult chosen one style narrative, but it subverts it in really interesting ways. It's all of those things that you would come to expect in YA, but it's also this incisive commentary on racism and violence. It's a legitimately moving picture of grief. It's about resilience. It's about bravery and standing up for the right thing, even when that's really hard. And it's about how little you often know about the people that you love most in the entire world. And I just can't say enough good things about this series. Like, this book was not as good as the first book, and it's still my 6th favorite book of the entire year. So that should go to show how good that series is. And I just need resolution for all of the seeds that have been planted. Like, I get it. Masterpieces take time. Tracy is in the mines preparing the best possible soup that she could feed us, but oh man, does 2025 feel far away. Coming in at number 5, we have Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. I think this is currently my favorite science fiction book, book. Not that I've read like a massive amount or anything, so if you have any recommendations, I'd be happy to hear them. But I've known that this was supposed to be really good since it came out like 2 years ago or something. And despite that, I still put it off until like 2 months ago. So take it from me, you can read this now. You can let yourself feel joy and adventure and awe at the human spirit presently, post haste. You don't have to put it off for no reason like I did. I can't really tell you a lot about this book because I went into it completely unspoiled, and I really do think that is the way, especially with this story. So all I will say just from the beginning of this book is that this is about this guy named Ryland who wakes up on a spaceship that has traveled thousands and thousands of light years away from Earth. And for this journey, Ryland and his two buddies were put into like space comas so they wouldn't age or like go insane and kill each other at any point during this long voyage. But that's a really dangerous thing to do for somebody, medically induced comas. So now that they are there, Ryland is the only one who wakes up from these pods. The other two have died at some point in the voyage. So yeah, it's just him all alone out in space, and the problem that he immediately discovers is that he has absolutely no memories, like full amnesia. At the beginning of the book, he doesn't even remember his own name. And he quickly discovers that even though he has no idea what his mission is, what he's supposed to do out there, whatever it is, his actions will determine the fate of all of humanity back on Earth. And the book goes on from there as he's trying to recover his memories and just figure out the mystery of the quest that he's been sent on. Lots of things continue to evolve from that point. This book has a very like hoorah, man, dude, bro kind of voice to the way that it's written. And that's the kind of thing that would be annoying, I think, if this was by a different writer. But somehow in this book, I ended up finding it charming, which is really saying something coming from somebody who apparently reads 85% books written by women. There's science in this book that's really important to understanding kind of the mechanics of the story, but it's really accessible. And overall, I love this. This is the kind of book that spikes your adrenaline. Like when you're reading this, you find yourself imagining your favorite movie soundtracks or like the Attack on Titan theme song in the background of the scenes that you're reading, because what is happening just feels so epic in scale. I was out here like punching the air rooting for this man. It was wild. But beyond that, the best parts of this book are also the most secret parts of this book. So I will not be speaking any further. I will just say that it ended up being so much more heartwarming and like emotional than I expected it to be going in. And I really think that it has an arc that I feel will stick with me just forever. I would kill to see this adapted into a movie. Apparently it's going to be, but we all know how that can go sometimes in Hollywood. So I'll believe it when I see it in theaters, but just really, really great. In fourth for 2023, we have What My Bones Know by Stephanie Fu. This was actually the last book that I read in 2023. It took me like almost all of December to get through just because it ended up being such an emotionally turbulent reading experience for me. And you know what? Sure, it might be recency bias, but this came in like a fucking bandit on this list, okay? Just out of nowhere to fight for the crown. It is phenomenal. I love memoirs. I find it very cathartic to read about other people's tragedies, and they're just really affirming and inspirational to me. I eat them up. I don't know what that says about me, but let's not worry about it, okay? Like the point is that memoirs have, for me, like the potential to hit a lot harder than other genres most of the time. And this one was fantastic. This is Stephanie's story of both her diagnosis of complex post-traumatic stress disorder and then also her non-linear journey of healing following said diagnosis. CPTSD is different from normal PTSD because where traditional PTSD is typically the result of one singular traumatic event or a small number of them, CPTSD is kind of a death by a thousand cuts situation. People who suffer from it were typically victims of persistent abuse and trauma over a protracted period of time in an unsafe environment. Oftentimes, like in this book, the abuse is from the victim's parents. And these experiences result in big changes to how these kids grow up to adapt to situations, respond to threats, emotionally connect with the other people in their lives. All of that is much harder for people with CPTSD, among a laundry list of other symptoms in addition to that. It's not fun. It's not a very good time. Stephanie's book is broken up into 5 sections. The first is a pretty explicit look at the abuse that she faced during her childhood, so definitely a tough read if you're not prepared for it going in. But the rest of the sections track her experiences afterwards, trying to heal as an adult many, many years later, now that she finally has language for what she's been feeling her entire life. And through all of the different things that she does in this book, it ends up being about finding a path forward where she's not healed because, like most mental illnesses, CPTSD is not a binary. Like, you don't just heal from it perfectly forever. But she's getting better and she's starting to see a future for herself, and she's starting to develop a much healthier life for herself and for the people that she loves. And it's just so tender to watch her go on this journey. Again, this took me so long to read just because it was so emotional. Like, I felt for her so strongly through this book. And beyond just her inner world, there's also some really fascinating commentary on generational trauma, especially in immigrant communities. And it's really interesting, and it comes together into a book that just works so well, both in showing how dark things can get and also how beautiful they can still be. I pulled a quote from this book as well, just because I feel like it does a good job kind of showing why I like it so much. Here's a theory. Maybe I had not really been broken this whole time. Maybe I had been a human, flawed and still growing, but full of light nonetheless. All this time, I had received plenty of love, but I'd given it too. Unbeknownst to me, I had been scattering goodness all around like fun-sized chocolates, accidentally falling out of my purse as I moved through the world. Perhaps the only real thing that was broken was the image I had of myself, punishing and unfair, narrow and hypercritical. Perhaps what was really happening was that, along with all of my flaws, I was a fucking wonder. I love this book. It's really good. Third place, bronze medal for 2023 goes to Babel by R.F. Kuang. I probably don't need to tell you what this book did to me, like I imagine you already know. I think a part of my soul like leaks out of my body with how much the ending of this book made me cry, like not only in general, but also on camera, which was something that I didn't have experience with prior to filming that vlog. So a new milestone in my short YouTube career that we experienced together this year. Babel is about a boy named Robin who is swept away from his community in China to study underneath this super famous Oxford professor, and ultimately to go on to Oxford's prestigious College of Translation, where the idea in this alternate historical fantasy version of Earth is that he will be able to use his native understanding of Chinese to quite literally fuel British Empire through the magic system of this world, which involve these silver bars, where if you inscribe two words in different languages that mean roughly the same thing, a fluent speaker of both of those languages can touch the bar, say whatever words are written on the bar, and then whatever concept is lost in translation between those two languages is made real in the space around the practitioner. That is probably kind of hard to understand without an example. So one example that we get in the book is that there's this metal bar that has both the German and the English word for secret carved onto it. And these words mean roughly the same thing, for sure. But the German word carries an extra kind of vibe and connotation of safety and refuge that the English word for secret doesn't really have. So in this case, if you speak both languages and you do the magic and you say the words, then for as long as you are touching that bar, you will be teleported into a safe refuge, because that is the part that is lost in translation between the two languages. It's being made real around you. It is a fascinating magic system for sure, especially if, like me, you're just a massive fucking nerd. It isn't fully realized. In some ways, the fantasy elements are the weakest part of this book. Like, you can definitely tell that the overarching story was much more important to Rebecca when she was writing this, but I still loved it. Like, the whole system ends up being very academic in terms of linguistics, so some people might find that boring, but again, I'm a nerd. I found it awesome. It is just so creative as a tool to tell the story. Just such an interesting idea. And the actual plot of this book ends up being Robin's story of finding himself as a cog in this machine, essentially, where his knowledge and labor as a Chinese person is invaluable to British Empire, but he's still treated with a lot of hostility from everybody around him. And through this, he ends up discovering this underground group that is trying to rebel against this system. And lots happens from there. Like, this book really picks up, especially in the back half. It is a fucking ride. And Robin's character in particular, in his growth throughout this story, like, I felt in my soul. R.F. Kuang, just on consistency alone, is probably my favorite author right now. Like, I have loved everything that this woman has pumped out, and she's only in her 20s. So I imagine that we will have a beautiful rest of our lives together as she continues to grow as an author and like change the entire world. She's brilliant, and this book is brilliant. And I especially think that right now, with decolonization efforts in Palestine and worldwide, and just like if you think for 2 seconds about history, all over history too, R.F. Kuang in this book captures just so immaculately how insidious oppression can be and how cruel and impossible it can feel to stand a chance at building a better future for yourself and for the people that you love. And just the ending of this book, it's brutal. It's so brutal, and also it's the only way that this book ever could have gone. Like, it is a scene that I will think about all of the time, maybe forever. It's just really good. Yeah. Third best of the year, Babel. Coming in at number 2, I have Beartown by Frederick Bachman. I honestly can't tell you how good this book was just shook me to my absolute core as much as it did. Like, the chokehold that this book had on me when I was reading it, unparalleled. For weeks afterwards, I was changed as a person. I love Frederick. I want this nice Swedish man to adopt me. I want to live in his town. I want to bake him warm gingerbread cookies. I want to study under him and learn whatever sorcery he is capable of putting into pages like these that don't even end up in their original language. Like, this is a book that's in translation. I can't even imagine what it would be like to read this in Swedish. This book is about a small town in the woods in Sweden, and the only thing that anybody cares about in this town is high school hockey. Now, did I know even a single thing about hockey going into this book? No, I did not. Don't let that stop you. It's like Haikyuu. Like, you don't have to know anything about the sport. You're still gonna care by the end about how they do. But anyways, back to the plot. For many, many years, Beartown's ice hockey team has just been garbage, like really bad. But when this book is taking place, for the first time in a long time, they finally have the chance again, it seems, to take back the high school crown, which, in addition to just giving everybody something to be proud of, could also make a massive, tangible economic difference in the town when it comes to state investment. So it's a big deal. But as this tournament is going on, something awful happens that basically basically splits the town in two and forces everybody inside of it to reckon with their own morality and complicity, and really just like what they value most in the world and how much they're willing to hurt each other in the name of those values. It is a banger. Like, this book is told through multiple perspectives that comprise what feels like everybody in the town. There are so many different characters that all feel fleshed out and interconnected into like this breathing whole. Even when sometimes those characters don't have names, like they still feel like authentic living people. It's such an achievement. I was a puddle on the ground when I finished this book. I think about it all of the time. It just feels like something that I will return to when like my frontal lobe is done developing and I'm like 30 and living in a real adult community surrounded by neighbors and acquaintances, rather than just living with my parents and like force feeding myself bottles of Soylent so I don't starve. That'll end one day, we hope. And this just feels like the kind of book that I will return to during each new era of my life. In my opinion, this would work as a standalone. It has a pretty completed story, but it's also a part of a series. The sequel I thought was still really good, but definitely not the same kind of magic that this book had. And I still have not read The Winners yet, the third book in the series, because I decided that I wanted to do it as a part of a vlog. I'm reading it for a video, so keep your eye out for that. But either way, this one is just 10 out of 10, 12 out of 10. I recommend it with everything I have as a human being on this planet. It's so good. And with that, we've come to my favorite book of the entire year. And if you've been following me for a while, you probably already know what this is because I've mentioned it and will continue to mention it whenever it's even like 5% relevance to the topic at hand. In number 1, we have Betty by Tiffany McDaniel. Where do I even start? I obviously read a lot of books this year, okay? Like, you're watching a video with a lot of bangers. There's obviously pretty strong competition, but when I tell you, I read this in like March, I think, pretty early on in the year, and I knew that nothing would dethrone it. It just became an instant classic for me. Even then, I feel like I knew that I would end up here making this video 2 weeks late, talking to you guys about this book at the top of this list. It's just such a special story. Betty is about this biracial Cherokee girl who grows up in a mixed-race family sometime around the mid-20th century. It's a coming-of-age story, and it really follows this girl Betty's like entire childhood and adolescence, from birth to about 18 or so at the end of the book. And through it all, this book explores all of the different kinds of violence that this family was exposed to, both from society and then also from each other, like between different members of the family. And the premise sounds fucking miserable. Like, you can say it. It sounds like a book that would just bend you over and whack you over and over again with trauma and heartbreak and just never talk to me again kind of type feelings. And yeah, this book will do that. It had me like ugly crying at an airport among strangers. A nightmare scenario for me, truly. But the absolute magic of this book, and the reason why it never feels gratuitous or exploitative to me, despite all of the tremendously heavy and sad things that happen in here. And it's basically all of them, like all of the bad things that you can possibly imagine, they're basically all in here. But this book has this magical atmosphere of hope and resilience, even in the face of really awful stuff. And it's really all because of Betty's dad in this book, who is spoken about with such reverence by the rest of the family that it's his philosophy of kindness and hope and love that ends up the backbone of the story. And it all ends up this just hypnotically beautiful story of resilience and of acceptance for the complicated love and feelings that you're going to have towards the complicated people in your life. Just the way that this book breaks you down and builds you back up again, it's sensational. And the best part, this is the kicker for me, is that this book was directly inspired by the actual life of Tiffany McDaniel's real life mother, Betty. It's semi-biographical and true to her mother's actual story with everything that she went through in her family. And this book would already be such a masterpiece without that, but just the additional layer of this whole thing being a love letter to the resilience of her mother, like, I'm trying to cry. It's just a really special story. I truly cannot recommend this enough. It was very much a once-in-a-lifetime read for me. It has a place on my book Mount Rushmore, I think, and it's perfect, and it's my gift to you during this trying time. If you can handle the heat, if you can deal with the like million triggers that this book has, it is so worth it. And here's a quote just to cap it off. It's one of my favorites from the book. "A girl comes of age against the knife, Betty, but the woman she becomes must decide if the blade will cut deep enough to rip her apart, or if she will find the strength to leap with her arms out and dare herself to fly in a world that seems to break like glass around her. May you have the strength." I love this book. I love all of these books that I've talked about today. But that's the list for 2023. We're done. I would love to hear your opinions. If you've read any of these books, please be nice. Like, know that they're parts of my soul, so be careful what you say. I'm fragile. But also, if you want to share some of your favorite books of last year, I would love to hear about them. I'm always looking for new things to read. And yeah, I hope that you guys are having a wonderful start to your 2023 here in mid-January, where I'm posting this video. Nice. Okay, I don't have anything else to say. Bye!